Michigan football is 5-0, coming off their most convincing win of the season, a blowout 42-7 victory in Lincoln over the Nebraska Cornhuskers. This is Hail to the Podcast, brought to you by Maize and Blue Review, and we are here to talk about that Michigan victory, the rest of their schedule upcoming, and maybe talk a little about some of those narratives we've been going after the last couple weeks. Which ones maybe are now busted, and are there any lingering concerns after what we said was a convincing win for Michigan in Lincoln? As always, I'm Trevor McCue, senior editor, Maize and Blue Review, joined by our insider and publisher, Josh Henschke, and his pups.
Yeah, my loud, obnoxious dog.
How you doing, bud?
I'm good. I was sick for the last half of the week, and that sucked. So feeling better now, so that's good.
I would blame myself. Maybe digitally, I've passed something to you after the previous bout they had, but and then also joining us in football season, a man I just spent a lot of time with, Brock Heilig. Good to see you again. How are you doing?
Good to see you too, Trevor. Yeah, we spent north of probably 20 hours in the car on the way to Lincoln and back, and it was a good time. Lots of corn. That was the biggest takeaway from the drive. Plenty of corn in Iowa and Nebraska. So it was a good time, good football game, and good to be back.
Yeah, that I-80 drive is something else. Real quick, I said it on the message boards. I think I tweeted about it as well, and it's kind of become almost a gimmick at this point. But legitimately, the people of Lincoln might be the nicest I've ever been around. I can't say enough about that community, and whether it was at, the restaurants or other establishments we went to, the folks that worked in the stadium, fans that we bumped into. I mean, everybody in that community, really, really nice and welcoming. I'd heard that before. It was good to experience it. That's a fan base that they deserve a winner, man. I hope Matt Rule is able to turn things around there and build it. They're in a really weird spot post Scott Frost. They kind of thought that was their savior or whatever, but just can't say enough nice things about our experience in the city and then at Memorial Stadium as well. So I wanted to touch on that real quick, but maybe having a better day Saturday was the entire Michigan Wolverine football team, though. This performance was not a shock to them. We'll probably talk about that a little bit with some of the post-game comments that we were able to get, Brock. But this was a football team that heard the noise outside and didn't really care, right? They knew what their game plan has been each game and building up. And they definitely heard some talk about Nebraska's run game and their run defense and came into this game with something to prove. And as Braden McGregor told me, you saw it, right? So point proven, point taken, right? Josh, biggest takeaway, any takeaway, whatever, just obviously from the jump, this was not a typical slow play road game from Harbaugh. This was Michigan came out firing and rode this win home.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the most complete performance they've had all year by a large margin. And, again, that's kind of the thing that we've been talking about all year is this consistent, tangible growth that you see from week to week. And you're looking at Michigan from week 1 to week 5. I mean, it's a completely different team. And this is kind of what we've been waiting to see for the last couple of weeks. So, I think this is just a complete performance. And, hopefully one of many more to come. They played practically near flawless football. So I don't know what building off near flawless looks like. And because obviously you can never play a perfect game by any means, but, I'll be curious to see once, the schedule starts to beef up a little bit, if this is what we think Michigan is, or if they're just the type to take advantage of weaker opponents. I don't see that anymore. But again, you wanted to see growth from week to week, and I think you got it in a major way this week. And all positive things to really say. And yeah, I mean, there's really nothing that I can point to and say, hey, maybe this might be something to work on, but. Yeah, I mean, just it was good all around. I mean, he even got, the second and third string guys in there for, for almost a full half. So that's huge for them. So
And
overall, good.
It was the best performance I think we've seen from the backup so far this year as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Without a doubt.
Yeah. And I think when you look at the season as a whole so far, this was kind of the game that Michigan fans were hoping for, in the sense of kind of scoring a little bit more on offense and just really looking the part of a top 2 or 3 team in the country, which Michigan is. And so that's kind of, I think, what fans were really striving for and really hoping for to see out of their team. And they got it on Saturday. It was just a great game of football. Right from the beginning, Michigan was the better team, and it was clear. Everyone in the stadium knew it from the beginning. That pass from J.J. McCarthy to Roman Wilson was ridiculous. Great catch, and even on the next Nebraska drive, Braden McGregor getting a hand on the ball and Kenneth Grant coming down with the interception. The game was never in doubt, and I think that's what Michigan fans were looking for in this one.
It's an interesting question. Was that the greatest catch in Michigan history, or are we just living in the moment? I think about that Darbo over the shoulder catch.
Yeah.
In terms of difficulty. I mean, God, Desmond though, Notre Dame. How do you top that?
I think
when you add the moment too, right?
If interceptions are on the table, I'd say Jordan Lewis is up there.
Hot take: you should have knocked it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that was cool. I was in the stadium for that one too. Yeah, that was an unreal grab as well. But yeah, Roman Wilson continues to, gosh, I'm gonna say exceed expectations, because I feel like anybody that even was labeling Roman as wide receiver 1 for Michigan, I don't think they were labeling him arguably the best receiver in the Big Ten right now, at least statistically. Right? What he's doing, receptions and tough grabs and getting open on JJ scrambles, and just, we talked about that Ronnie Bell rule so much this offseason, Josh. Roman feels like, to me, I mean, he's not getting the crazy target differential that Ronnie had,
right,
but he's doing a lot of the things Ronnie did and still doing the things Roman Wilson did and more. Right. We weren't seeing difficult catches like that from either one of those two last year.
Yeah, I think the and more part is that he's healthy too. I think the big thing for him, if he were to stay healthy these last 2 years, I think the discussion around Roman Wilson this year, considering what he's done, is that, there's really no surprise, because I think that's the type of receiver that Roman Wilson should have been and is, given the fact that he just not had a ton of luck injury wise throughout his career. But I mean, things are really falling into place for him at the right time. And that's good for Michigan, because I know I want to go back to a question here who is asking for P Maximus, who's our number 2 receiver. At this point, there's quite a large margin between Roman Wilson and everyone else. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because, Roman's putting together stuff. He's putting together results, leading the country in touchdown receptions, and, doesn't have a ton of receiving yards, but again, there's productivity there. And, the golf there isn't necessarily a bad thing, but yeah, I think we're just kind of seeing Roman Wilson healthy, number 1. That's the most important thing. And number 2, having that all come together, because this time last year and the year before that, this is kind of the time of year where you start to see Roman Wilson miss a game or two, or have his, targets drop significantly. So just keep going. Just, Harbaugh says this all the time, just do you and just keep doing you. That's what they just got to do right now, especially Roman. Just got to keep doing what he's doing, finding ways to get open, and, coming in through in the clutch when JJ and the offense needs him most. And that was what Ronnie Bell did so well. And it's good to see someone kind of taking over that mantle. We thought it would have been someone else, but if someone is doing it, that's good. And more attention on Roman means someone else is going to get open. Colson Loveland is demanding double teams as well. So, someone eventually is going to benefit from, a guy like Roman deserving more attention, and we'll see who that is. And I don't think Cornelius Johnson, just to go back to P Maximus's point, I don't think he's not showing up every game. It's just that they haven't really needed him in a sense.
Well, and let's be clear, the difference here isn't as significant as you would think.
Okay? Right. Yeah.
Roman has 19 receptions. Cornelius has 15.
Right.
They're both catching 75% of their targets. Roman has 326 yards. Cornelius has 256. Both have 17 yards per reception. And then there's a gulf, 8 touchdowns to 1. Right. Yeah. So,
the one is pretty good.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, I think that's been the most obvious thing, but I know what he means though. Cornelius has struggled with consistency, right? We saw Ohio State, and then there's a game where he goes 0 for 2 on targets too. So
right. And at the same time too, you got Blake Corum that kind of demands touches in short yardage situations near the goal line too, who is right up there in top of the country in touchdown runs too. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, and obviously player ability is part of that too, and the consistency, but there's also multiple layers to that discussion as well.
Brock, do you have wide receiver thoughts, or do you want to get the Blake Corum conversation started?
I could probably do both, honestly. I would just
right.
in the wide receiver area, I'd say Cornelius Johnson is still the number 2 wide receiver on this team. I just don't think anyone else has really done enough to overtake him in that regard so far. But yeah, like you mentioned, Trevor, with the numbers, the touchdown difference is real big, but everything else is kind of identical. And so I feel like just based off what Cornelius Johnson has done in his time at Michigan, he kind of by default has that second wide receiver spot locked up. But yeah, definitely would like to see a little bit more out of him. But I mean, Roman's just been so good. It's kind of hard to get him the ball.
And let's be clear, this is a group that has dealt with injuries throughout fall camp and bleeding into the season a little bit, and they're finally healthy, right? So if you include Colston Loveland in this, he's the 3rd receiver. He's tied with Cornelius for receptions, not a lot of yards. And Brock, you and I were talking about this all weekend. It's kind of shocking he hasn't found the end zone yet. But Smaj Morgan's a freshman that's looked really good again in that AJ Henning role. He's not getting a ton of targets, but what he does, he looks like a guy that could be an explosive playmaker. You hope he kind of keeps developing, could be a factor this year. And then Tyler Morris and Darius Clemens are both 2 guys that have dealt with some injuries that are coming along and getting healthier. We saw Clemens get a couple grabs and look good Saturday. So I'll be interested to see as that group gets healthier, if we start to see it spread out a little bit more, or if somebody could push, Cornelius Johnson for some of that rep share on the outside. I'm gonna stick to my guns and say I do think Clemens has a chance of that. Hopefully I'm right at some point here, but yeah, I don't have a problem with the domination Roman's getting, because before the season even started, Coach Bellamy, Ron Bellamy, said something along the lines of whoever proves they're explosive is going to get the ball. Mm-hmm. And Roman Wilson's proved he's explosive. So he's going to, he's going to keep getting the ball. But yeah, Blake Corum, Josh brought him up. To my eyes, Brock, that was maybe not statistically, the Heisman level Blake Corum we saw last year, but just in terms of how he ran and when he ran, and just little things to me, his cuts, his speed, his burst, looked a lot like Blake Corum to me on Saturday.
Absolutely. And, he didn't run for north of 200 yards like he did in some of the Big Ten games last season. I think in the Big Ten opener last year against Maryland, he ran for almost 250 yards, and we haven't seen that from him this year. But I think Michigan's perfectly fine with that, because he's not getting 30 or
right,
25, 30 carries a game. I think he had 16 on Saturday, and they're not running him into the ground sort of like they did last year. And Obviously, like we saw it ended up as injury, or it ended up in an injury. And so I think that's the biggest takeaway for me with Corum is that, they're kind of keeping him. They're not keeping him on a snap count per se, but they're kind of just managing his carries, making sure he's getting subbed out, and they've brought in Mullings and Edwards and guys like that to kind of just keep him fresh and really keep him ready to go as the season goes on and these games get more and more important.
Yeah, I think it's a great call. I do think there's going to be a game or multiple games where Corum gets 25, 30 carries, but I think that's going to be a game where they need him to do that. And I think they've figured out, you know what? There's other things we can do, whether, like you said, it's involving other backs or some short things we can do in the passing game. There's other things we can do where we can still get Blake Corum, right? Whether it's the 3rd and shorts, the 4th and shorts, the red zone TD runs, like what makes Blake Corum great? We can still get enough of him without doing 30 carries, right? So, Josh, this kind of bleeds into, I guess, one of our first concern narratives that may still be lingering on, and then maybe some positive coming out of it as well. So obviously, talking about running backs and talking about Donovan Edwards. A theme I have been kind of hammering since the season began was you got to get Edwards double-digit carries. Mm-hmm. You don't really get to see Edwards get in his groove. You don't get to see the big runs until you get him double-digit carries, right? Well, they did that against Nebraska. And while there were carries where he did look a little, I don't know, fiercer with his runs, and he looked better at times, he still finished 14 carries, 48 yards, a 3.4 average. On the flip side of that, Kalel Mullings had another good game. Only 5 carries, but 43 yards. That's 8.6 and a touchdown. I don't think I'm ready to say should Kalel Mullings be RB2. Mm-hmm. But even Jim Harbaugh has kind of suggested he's going to start eating into Donovan's carries at minimum at this point. So I guess just where are you on the positive meter for Kalel, the concern meter for Donovan, and what do you expect to see from those two in the next couple games?
Yeah, I think what Kalel has over someone like Donovan, even technically Corum as well, is that, they're both very different in terms of the style of runner they are compared to what Kalel is too. So there's going to be situations where they might need a bigger back there to pick up some tough yards. And now that Mullings has proven to, or at least showing that he's capable of taking that responsibility, again, that kind of takes a little bit off Corum's plate as well, maybe a little bit off Donovan's plate as well. And now you got a guy that's really specifically designated to kind of pick up the tough yardage. Obviously a great performance on Saturday. That 20-yard run is really impressive. Having a guy that can break through arm tackles and kind of bust through the line of scrimmage is going to be huge for those two guys. So I don't know if Edwards and Mullings are technically married in a sense. I still think that there's a role for Edwards that's special to Edwards,
without a doubt,
in terms of getting out wide and even being a receiver. But there's you gotta start having to see a little bit more productivity from Edwards, and you have. It's not necessarily a big change, but there's definitely been some improvement. But I don't know what that role looks like for Edwards. And Derek here mentions a good point. Edwards might just be a back that gets better as the O-line wears down, the defense for 3 quarters. I think that might just be his role, that someone who takes advantage of a beaten down offensive line, late in the games where both, you have a rotation of him and Blake and perhaps even now Kalel too. So I don't know what needs to be done with Edwards, and I'm not necessarily concerned because you've got someone that you can rely on with Blake. So I think it's from what I think I think you'll start seeing again just some progress being made to eventually where, he's going to have one of those games where he breaks off a big run. But yeah, I mean, as far as concern, my concern is relatively low, 5 games into the year. And I just think it's great now that you've got another guy that you can trot out there confidently in Kalel, and who can pick up some big yardage, because, he really wasn't part of the discussion, if at all, heading into the year. So he's done a really
it was like
good job.
right when fall camp ended.
Yeah.
We had been hearing about this Hall and Stokes battle all throughout camp.
Yeah.
And then Mullings kind of just sneaks in as this consistent guy, right?
Yep.
So,
And it also helps too that both Hall and Stokes have been banged up. So
sure.
that's another part of taking advantage of the opportunities that you're given. And that's what part of that is what Kalel's been doing as well. So, there's nothing really bad than when a 3-headed running back room that all kind of do different things in their own different ways. So, it's up to the staff to kind of put these guys in situations to make them succeed. And really for Corum, I mean, you can put them out there in any situation, they'll be fine. But I think Donovan's kind of more of a specialized case right now, until he can, until that light bulb moment goes off, whatever that looks like.
If I could jump in here, I'd like to say I'm a little bit more concerned than Josh is at this point in the season. I'd say my concern level as it relates to Donovan Edwards is rising quickly. He's just looking different, and I don't know what it is. If you would have told me before the season started that 5 games in, Donovan Edwards wouldn't have a touchdown, and maybe even throw Colson Loveland in there too, but that's besides the point, I would have laughed in your face. I would have said there's no way Donovan Edwards is not scoring a touchdown in the first 5 games. And he's it's not even that he's not scoring touchdowns, he's just not breaking through the offensive line and not busting out any long runs that we saw toward the end of last season. And it's starting to become a little bit of a concern of mine, in the sense that I don't know if he's not seeing the holes, because I feel like sometimes there are some there and he's not seeing it. He's not being patient and waiting for that hole to open up. And I just say that he's looking a little less certain, I guess, of himself and maybe his abilities than he was at the end of last year. So my concern with him is kind of growing, but it's good. I would say that Mullings is kind of stepping up, just in case Edwards can't get back to where we saw him at his peak at the end of last year.
I do want to say something else about Mullings in a second, but I'm kind of somewhere in the middle with you two when it comes to Donovan. I do think there's some truth to the 4 quarters, right? That this team does and has only played 3 quarters in every game this year. That was kind of a theme we were beating before this Nebraska game, right? Like, if you actually look at points per possession and things like that, Michigan was the most efficient team. SP Plus from Bill Connolly on ESPN has always been one of my favorite metric measurements. He's got Michigan number 1 right now, and he does a really good job of explaining why. Like, yes, who they've played matters, right? The schedule matters. But that's just part of it. What did they do in those games, right? I think we've reached this weird – Brock and I had a lot of time in the car to talk about this with the AP poll coming out. We've just got this weird thing now where it's like, oh, you played this person? Like, boom, you move up. Complete disregard for what happened and what we know about those teams now, right? Florida State's got 2 top 10 wins against LSU and Clemson. You might have 2 unranked teams, and they're going to count as 2 top 10 wins, right? But anyway, distracted. What I liked better about Donovan Saturday was the yards after contact. In the start of this year, his yards after contact average was literally less than a yard. You're talking about a dude going down as soon as he gets hit, basically. And he actually had, I don't want to lie, his yard after contact average on Saturday was 2.07. It's not elite by any means, but it's a big improvement. It was more than what Blake Corum had, pretty far behind Kalel Mullings with his 5-yard average. But that's my biggest thing too, is it almost feels like his patience is more of a hesitation. As soon as there's a gap, he hits it, and then boom, down he would go, right? We didn't see that playmaking ability. I saw a little bit more of that Saturday. I thought he was running a little bit harder. thought his vision looked a little better. He still hasn't broken one, right? He still hasn't been that home run hitter yet, but I thought he looked a little bit better Saturday. But yeah, Kalel Mullings. I remember after the spring game, running back coach Mike Hart made a comparison that isn't a crazy comparison because they both played linebacker and running back in high school and switched back and forth between the two positions. But the comparison was Hassan Haskins, right? Just that big back. And Brock, you and I talked about this at the press availability afterwards. Kalel Mullings was there, and so is Josiah Stewart standing next to each other. And they look like the same person build-wise, which is remarkable to think about because Stewart got labeled as like this undersized edge guy, and we kept telling everybody he's crazy strong. You watch when things click, he's going to bully people. He did. And then Kalel Mullings, he's too big and, whatever term to be running back, they should leave him at linebacker. Well, now look, right? So, Josh, to your point, very different style back. What do you think of the Haskins comparisons? Right, I'm not saying Mullings is going to be the leading rusher this year or whatever. He's not going to get 5 touchdowns against Ohio State. But is that the kind of bruiser running back that has Jim Harbaugh done it again with a position change?
Perhaps. I think physically, I think you could make that comparison to Haskins. I don't think athletically you could make that comparison.
6'2", 240, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see Mullings clearing dudes, and maybe he can, but I don't.
If he can't do the hurdle, it doesn't count.
I mean, maybe I'd love to see him attempt it, but in a position where it won't count, it won't matter. But yeah, I mean, I think
there we go.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, there you go. I just don't see Mullings doing that, but he doesn't have to. That's not his. Right. That's not what they want him to do. But yeah, I think there's a little bit more than the Mullings has to do to get to that level. I mean, he's got to show that he's got to be able to break away. He's got to be able to break it, make guys miss an open field, that kind of thing. I mean, yeah, being able to break through the line of scrimmage and busting off a 20-yard run is good, but you're going to have to be a little bit more if you want to have a little more of the load, so to speak. You're not going to necessarily, stay away from the short yardage situations if you can't, make guys miss in open field and break more than just arm tackles, which is still good and better than most. But yeah, I think physically you could make that comparison, and it's not necessarily it's not a bad comparison to make at all. I mean, yeah, to have a guy that physically imposing and have the athletic ability to play as a running back, regardless of what your role looks like, I think that's a pretty good thing for Michigan. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see how his role develops over the next few games, because I think he's I think he's really made an impression on Harbaugh, and I think you'll start to see kind of more as things go on. And credit to Schromm more too, by the way. I mean, that was a hell of a game he called, one of his best at Michigan, and I think that kind of proves my point even more, that they really missed Harbaugh more than they kind of let on to believe. And 2 games in with Harbaugh back, and Michigan plays their most complete game. I don't think that's a coincidence.
No, I think having everybody back and roll makes a lot of sense.
100%.
One last note on Mullings before we move on. Josh, you mentioned how he's really impressed Harbaugh, and I think it was last week Harbaugh compared him to Toby Gerhart, who
that's a good comparison.
He finished as a Heisman runner-up, and I was looking at his stats.
Should have won it.
Huh?
Should have won it.
Yeah, maybe he should have. I was looking at his stats, and they were pretty crazy. And obviously, Kalel Mullings isn't going to run for more than 2,000 yards and almost 30 touchdowns. But
right,
that just shows you what Harbaugh thinks of Mullings and how highly he thinks of him as a player. And he's not going to have that type of production, but it just goes to show what the staff thinks of him.
Let's keep the shout outs for the run game, the shout outs for Sherrone Moore going, and talk about the offensive line. This was the first game where we saw Ladarius Henderson start at left tackle, Carson Barnhart starting at right tackle. If you follow me, you know I'm a fan of this move. I thought mixed results in some ways. One, that was Carson Barnhart's best game of the year. He's just more natural at right tackle. And I don't think Zach Zinter is somebody that would say this out loud, but he looked more comfortable with Carson Barnhart on his shoulder as well. Ladarius Henderson, I think, played really well, physically showed the footwork that makes him a good potential left tackle. He showed the length with his arms. He also gave up 3 pressures, right? And that's kind of been my knock on Barnhart is he gives up a lot of pressure. I don't know if he's the best guy to have on the left, but I really like him on the right because of his athletic ability and what he does in the run game, etc. But, Harbaugh came out and he said he thought Henderson and Keegan had great games. They look at different things, right? Like I'm very numbers based, so I have different opinions of different things. But overall, the O-line has gotten better every week, as Derek mentions. Looks like they might be gelling better. And yeah, Drake Nugent was part of that early concern, I would say. And he is already the best center in the Big Ten, already one of the top 10 in the country now. His rise has been quick and impressive. I don't think there's any concern about Keegan Nugent-Zinter. That interior has been incredible. But Josh, pick up where you want with the O-line conversation. I know Hinton was a little banged up.
Yeah.
That kind of opened the door for this. We have this conversation every week. What do you think is going to happen in practice? Where are we headed with this?
Yeah, I guess it also depends on what Hinton's injury status is, I guess. But, I think results are results. And, the stats don't lie. And the eye in the sky doesn't lie as well. I think you can see what they do with Henderson on the left and Barnhart on the right. And they were, I wouldn't say night and day different, but they were significantly better, from even just a week 1 to week 5. And part of that too is that, Drake Nugent is who he is, who's a stud. But yeah, I think at this point you got to roll with what works. And I know Harbaugh mentioned today with the media that he kind of wanted to have more of a rotation and would love in a perfect world, of course, he would love to have a rotation similar to what he has with the defensive line. I don't know if that's feasible. And he even kind of said the same thing too. He doesn't know if that's feasible, but yeah, if there's a system to where you can say like, okay, let's start Henderson on the left and then kind of rotate guys in from there. If the drop off isn't significant or there is none, you could kind of make that work. I've made this point a few times on the site too, is that, I guess I wouldn't want to say a normal year, but in a traditional year under Harbaugh, what Michigan did with Hinton the first 3-4 games, I would say most people probably would accept the results that they had. However, when you're in a program now where the expectation is to dominate every week,
literally be the best offensive line in the country.
Good is not good enough anymore. You have to be great. And I wouldn't say that they're at a great level yet with Henderson in Barnhart, but I think if they continue down that path, they can be. And I think that's their best scenario to get to that level. But yeah, and a lot was said during the week about Nebraska's number 1 rush defense, and they kind of depanced them the second drive of the game. That they eclipsed what Nebraska gave up traditionally in a year. I think it was like 45 yards a game. I think they gave up the first 4 games. Yeah, they had that in the second drive of the game. That's kind of it's just they blew that narrative out of the water, and a lot of that had to do because just the offensive line was moving people. So at this point, I'm not gonna sit here and say that I know more than the coaches do, and I see more than what the coaches do. But I think at some point you have to kind of pick a 5 and run with it. And I don't know, maybe they know something that I don't inside the building. But I think Henderson and Barnhart give you that best chance. at this point, the results are the results. And again, I mean, there's nothing against Hinton. I think he's good. He's fine. He's good enough, but they're in a situation now where they can't be good enough. They have to be great. And, I think the path to that level is abundantly clear, at least to me.
Something I thought was interesting from what Harbaugh said earlier today was he mentioned that they want to have Trente Jones start to see the field more.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at the line as a whole, like you mentioned, Josh, I think most people would agree that Henderson and Barnhart is probably the best five, and it gives you the best chance of winning and gelling and all that kind of stuff. And you're kind of sitting back and looking like, okay, they started the year with Hinton, and then they brought in Henderson and moved over Barnhart, and now they want Trente Jones to play more. And you're kind of looking at the line like, how are we going to find room for all these guys to see the field? And I think
you play 8 offensive linemen.
Yeah, play eight offensive linemen and
JJ, tight
ends
and JJ,
Corum and Roman out there. And
no, Loveland, Garner, JJ. That's it.
Yeah, maybe, but it is quite a phenomenon of how much they want to get all these guys involved, and they just can't. I mean, there's just not enough room on the field. You can only have 11 guys, and so I don't know what they're going to do. And it seems like we're talking about the offensive line every week and how they need to settle on a starting 5, and then Harbaugh will come out and say they want to play Trente Jones more, and it's like, how's that going to happen, right? So I really don't know what the plan is there going forward.
Jones has been really, really good in that 6th offensive lineman role. I think for a bunch of different reasons, they were fine with Jones in that role, and they liked that. But he's been so good. It's now there's like this argument, maybe he should be playing some right tackle, or maybe he plays left and Barnhart. Like we're like right where they started in fall camp at this point. It's interesting. Again, we pegged this as a good problem to have. But, and again, I'm with Josh. I'm not going to pretend to know more than them. Former players and coaches seem to like the rotation idea better than the nerds like us do. Jim Scarcelli is a guy that joins us and Dennis on Afternoon Live often. He seems to think the rotation thing would work. So, again, I'm not going to pretend to know more. I trust the coaches that have won back-to-back Joe Moore awards, but I don't know. Maybe I just want to be right, and I'm going to stick with this Henderson Barnhart thing. But yeah, to my eyes and some numbers, it just makes a lot of sense to me. I like to call out when Josh makes mistakes. So are you editing it as we speak?
Yeah, I was actually. I can't fix this, but yeah, I was working on that. I was working on that.
Our buddy Justin here with a quick call out. Why does the
title fix it? Okay, never mind. I can fix it in here. I was fixing it.
Are we gonna pretend it never happened?
On the YouTube. Yeah, quick, delete his comment, would you?
Okay. Yeah, so Michigan plays Minnesota next week. I do want to spend a little time talking about that, but we've spent the first more than half the show talking about the offense, which is ironic in a way because the best defense in the country is Michigan's, right? And they proved it again. If you start talking about when the starters come out as well, again, back to this team playing 3 quarters, what this defense has done in the beginning of the season. Again, I know who they've played, blah, blah, blah. You can look at metrics that adjust for strength of schedule, and this is still the best defense in the country. So hear me out for a minute, right? This was a little bit different. The edge, we talked a lot about the defensive tackles and the pass rush they've generated to start the year. This was the best edge performance of the season. And I don't know about you, Josh. It got me very excited.
Yeah, no, I know a lot of people, or at least on our message boards, were kind of freaking out or getting a little nervous about what Josiah Stewart was doing. And I think that kind of really,
understatement. Yeah,
I think that really, he really came out and proved that what he's capable of this week. Had a great game. Yeah, I mean, the edge play, fantastic. Braden McGregor was responsible for 2 big plays in the first quarter alone. He's just so good at finding the ball and batting it up in the air, at least getting a deflection with his hands. Yeah, I mean, Kenneth Grant, being who he is. It's just overall, yeah.
Interception.
Yeah, it just overall, I mean, what a great game from the edge. And Yeah, I mean, that was kind of something that I feels like it's been building up towards these last couple of weeks. So it's good to see that kind of pay off. Good to see Josiah Stewart get in there and do what he's capable of doing. And hopefully that's a sign of things to come. I won't necessarily say that should be the standard because every week is different. But from a defensive standpoint, I think that was a great game. Really, really shut down anything that Nebraska was trying to do. I mean, defensively, I don't have any complaints. Probably the most complete game of defensively they've had. Well, I shouldn't say complete. They gave up some plays they shouldn't have. So
I'm going to ask Brock about that. Yeah, no, the edge specifically, like you said, though. I think McGregor and Stewart both kind of said something along the lines of what you just said. Like it felt like it was building towards this, right? But 12 pressures, 4 and 4 for Moore and Stewart, 2 and 2 for McGregor and Harrell, 4 sacks, 1 for Moore, 2 for Stewart, 1 for McGregor. Like you said, the batted ball from McGregor and Moore got a tip. Just a ridiculous performance by those outside guys in a game plan that kind of changed things up. I don't know if that was a reaction to Mason Graham being gone or something they saw in game planning with Nebraska's offensive line. I'm not sure, but the offensive side, the concern meter tends to be with Donovan Edwards. I don't know if concern's the right word with the secondary, but like you just brought up, Josh, in terms of still letting up some plays. Obviously, Will Johnson's still kind of working his way back here. Rod Moore will kind of get into that as well, still slowly working his way back. Mike Sainer still, though, even he's kind of given up a big play that you've been surprised by. There's been some weird angles that they're taking in the secondary.
Yeah.
Brock, I guess, what have you noticed? What do you think about that? And then again, similar question to with Edwards. Is this something you think is just naturally going to work its way out, or are you raising a little bit of an eyebrow there?
Yeah, it was really weird on Saturday to see Mikey Sainer still give up a significant play. I don't know exactly how many yards it was, maybe 25 or 30 or 35, something like that. But he's a guy who's not out of position very often, and to see him, kind of get beat was weird. And then we saw the first play of the second half. I think it was Nebraska came out and threw that slant, and for the second week in a row, a Michigan safety kind of just took a really poor angle and whiffed. And last week it was Rod Moore. This week it was Keon Sabb. And I wouldn't put that necessarily in the concern category that Edwards is, for me, at least in my opinion, just because we're seeing like a handful of plays here and there where they kind of just have a small bust in coverage. It's not this type of thing where it's a recurring issue and they're getting beat over and over again, but instead it's just we're really nitpicking at this point. The one play against Rutgers with Rod Moore, and then the one play against Nebraska with Keon Sabb, and maybe there were a few others here and there, but they're not getting broken, right? They're not getting beat deep. They're not they're not giving up the big play, and even when they are, they're chasing down the receiver and forcing them to stay out of the end zone. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that we're really, really nitpicking and really just looking at every small mistake that they're making, because they've been so good. There's not much to pick apart because they're playing near flawless football.
Well, and Josh, this is a team we think can win a national championship. Right. So I think we're looking through the lens in that context as well. And also, you blink and the college football season's gone.
Yeah.
Right. We're talking about literally hitting the halfway mark next week. I mean, I know playoffs are, but regular season, halfway mark. And we're still talking about, Will Johnson, who was projected to be one of the best corners in the Big Ten, with King and DeJean in Iowa not even really playing a ton. And, like you said, Brock, we're not talking about a bunch. He did give up a big yard after catch, but one, not a touchdown. Right. So I do think we're nitpicking, but I kind of think we're in position where we kind of have to, right? Because that's the expectations this team has set.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. Yeah, and I think just because they've been playing so well too, you can kind of we're at the position where there's not a whole lot to critique, and then you're getting into the nitpicking stuff. So yeah, I think I we'll we'll kind of see how it develops. I mean, there's really they're kind of the good news is they're getting into the brunt of the schedule here that kind of gets a little more difficult. The last time they played in Minnesota, they didn't exactly fare very well. Won the game, but didn't make it very easy on themselves. So, and another away test is good. I mean that Minnesota atmosphere is a good atmosphere and a good test. Now, yeah, you just kind of have to see how things play out. I think their first, man, because the things have changed so much with the outlook of the conference and stuff. Like Michigan State was kind of a test heading into this season. Now they're kind of not. No.
Kind of.
Yeah, so it's tough. I mean, maybe
that
like
rude?
Penn State. I mean, the Penn State's probably their next big test here. So,
not even close. It's
So I
if
guess
they get tested anywhere between now and Penn State, a lot of narratives are going to become
absolutely
flying back. Right?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, because this week at Minnesota, they're okay. I don't think they're going to win.
That Northwestern loss has completely changed my perspective on that team.
Yeah. And Indiana next week, the week after, no, next week. God, I'm a train wreck right now. The Indiana game too, they just fired their OC, so they're a disaster. So I don't know what you can really take away. I just, as long as they're winning, I think it's fine. In the next test, the next big test in Penn State is obviously going to be the one where we can really take away, what this team is when, you're facing real competition. So, and who knows, maybe it'll be like the Penn State game of last year where we thought we were saying the same thing and it turned into what it was. So, we'll see. We'll find out.
Brock, you are heading to Minneapolis, so you're going to see the Minnesota game in person. I want to ask you one question, kind of bleed this final defensive conversation into Minnesota, and then if you can kind of just give me an idea of, you go into every one of these games, like what you're hoping to see, kind of thing, right? One thing I'm going to be interested to see. I know Rod Moore is being brought along, right? They're trying to get him healthy. What was very interesting to me during the Nebraska game was the way they were getting Rod Moore on the field was at backup nickel, which to me meant they didn't want to take Keon Sabb off the field, right? So I'm not in any position to say I think Keon Sabb is taking Rod Moore's job or putting that in place. I don't think that's where we are. I think Rod Moore could be one of the best safeties in the country, and they're going to continue to bring him along health wise. But that stuck out in a big way to me. I think that's a lot of praise for Keon Sabb, and I think that's also kind of an acknowledgement that maybe they're going to get a little creative in the future in the way they're rotating some of these corners and safety pieces. So I guess on that part, do you expect to see Rod Moore getting more safety looks? I mean, we kind of thought he was going to start Saturday until we watched the warm-ups, right? And then in general, like I said, Minnesota game, what are you hoping to see after this big win in Nebraska?
Yeah, it was really weird to see Keon Sabb get the start on Saturday, and then Rod Moore came in after, and it was sort of this realization like, wow, Keon Sabb has really come on and really proved himself early on in the season, when Rod Moore was out due to injury, and Sabb has just played really well. Like I mentioned, he had that one play on Saturday where he took a bad angle, but he's been really, really solid. He's been maybe one of the players that has emerged the most, maybe alongside a guy like Kalel Mullings, like we talked about earlier. But I think if anything, Michigan now knows it has a little more depth at safety than it had coming into the season. just because Sab has been so good. And Trevor, like you mentioned, they moved Rod Moore over to nickel just because they wanted to keep Keon Sab off the field. And we kind of saw Sainer still and Rod Moore rotating in and out, and Keon Sab was in and out with them. And even throwing Makari Page, they were all kind of sort of rotating and getting on and off the field. And I think that really bodes well for Michigan because they can stay fresh and stay healthy. And now they have full trust in so many guys that maybe they didn't have going into the season. Rod Moore was hurt. Keon Sab hadn't really proved himself. And so you're sitting there with Makari Page and Mikey Sainer still, and then sort of a question mark, right? So I feel like that really, really works in Michigan's favor in the sense that their secondary is now more complete. And
a guy you like a lot too, Quentin Johnson's played well too.
Yeah, exactly. And he had that interception against Bowling Green, right? So just so much depth at secondary or in the secondary, and yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Maybe they can, if Rod Moore still isn't fully 100%, because he was questionable on the availability report, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if he's still not 100%, you can afford to work him back in slowly because Keon Sab, you have trust in him. And I think that's another thing about the schedule too, is that you don't necessarily need all your starters at this point in the season just because, the Big Ten West isn't any good. And this is now the second week in a row where Michigan's going to play a Big Ten West team in Minnesota. And it's just not a game that anyone expects to be competitive. And so you can
Urban Meyer might.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Maybe
Although he might be preoccupied now with other things. So
yeah, exactly.
Troll level 10.
You can afford to keep a guy like Rod Moore on the sidelines just because Keon Sab has been so good, right? And so if Rod Moore's not healthy, Keon Sab can be out there and they can do that rotation thing like they did in Nebraska. But yeah, looking ahead to this Minnesota game, it's crazy how bad the Big Ten West is, and I'm certainly not expecting this game to be competitive. I wouldn't expect anyone really would, but the atmosphere will be good. I will say Minnesota, they hosted Nebraska, was it at the beginning of the year, or they hosted a Big Ten West team, and vibes were good. The stadium was jumping and energized, and I feel like if anything, it might be. I'm not comparing Minnesota to Penn State in any way, but I feel like the night atmosphere on the road in the Big Ten will be a little bit of a good test for Michigan as they build their way up and work toward Penn State.
Oh, was it 2015? What was the Minnesota game? Jerry Kill was the intern, and terrible clock management at the end, but Michigan almost lost it. That was a night game at Minnesota. I think that was 2015. You're on mute, Josh. You're on mute.
Whoops. I think that was the last time they played Minnesota at Minnesota. Was
at Minnesota, maybe because
2015.
Because
they almost lost that game. They won in not in overtime.
Brock, we just talked about this. 2020, they came to Michigan. That was it. Yeah, and then 2014 they won in Ann Arbor as well. Yeah. That was the Shane Morris game.
Yeah. I thought 2015 was the goal line stand.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that was 15. Right. Yeah,
that's the last time they've been at Minnesota.
That's crazy.
Apart from the COVID year.
Yeah. Apart from the COVID year.
We'll have to see now. I'd imagine even adding the teams they've added, the schedule format, they made a big deal about they wanted, if you're a 4-year student, you should play at every stadium, right? So you'll go every other and home for the one, and you'll see if they maintain that, because it's weird to think it's been a very lopsided rivalry, but Little Brown Jug is fun. It's a cool regional thing, and as we move to all of this expansion, and we're going to lose a lot of, I think, those little things that make college football great, doing something where that can keep going. I think that's important to keep some of that regionality, some of that tradition going.
Yeah, I think all trophy games should be yearly games. I mean, the Red River Shootout, that should be a yearly thing. Little Brown Jug should be a yearly thing. I don't know about the one between Michigan and Northwestern. I don't know if that one should be. I mean, it's a meaningful trophy for sure, but that's just so new that it doesn't really have tradition behind it. But the Paul Bunyan Trophy, Paul Bunyan's axe, Little Brown Jug, all of those games should be yearly games. Because like it's crazy.
It's impossible to do now. It just
I know, which sucks. I mean,
know.
because that should be a protected rivalry, a trophy game that has that kind of significance. So, it kind of stinks for teams that lose a game like, I don't know, I can't think of one right now, but like Minnesota losing in 2015 or whatever, and have going 5 years of not being able to get it back, or at least try until 2020. I mean, that kind of stinks for that program. And it kind of loses the luster of it a little bit too, because you just hold on to it and you don't have to do anything to defend it.
I've kind of let go of it at this point because I just know there's no way around it. But Brock and I, we talked about a lot with 22 hours in the car, but I had to explain to the young buck what it used to be like, where there wasn't even a championship game, and kind of like that mentality of the 80s and the 90s. But aside from what they've gone to now, which is the monster conferences, the expanded playoffs, blah, 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 if there's any level of going back, take me all the way back. Give me 10-team conferences. You play 9 games, so everybody plays each other once. The Big 12 did it for 1 year and threw it out the window because they ended up naming TCU and Baylor both co-champs after they said they weren't going to do that. I thought that was so dumb. You had a perfect round robin, but I'm excited about the expansion. I think it's the right thing to do for this era of college football, but there is a part of me that this Minnesota game just used to mean more in it, and I hope that continues, but that regionality and that tradition, we'll see once it goes to 12 teams. But for now, regardless of outcome, I still think it's a cool matchup. It's something to be, interested and excited about. And how Michigan responds again. Do they have another complete game like they had with the Nebraska? Put 2 of these back to back, right? The run pass balance, I think, is something I'm going to be watching. They talked about 50-50 all off season. While Harbaugh was gone, they were damn near on the dot 50-50. It's been 2-1 favoring the run since Harbaugh's been back.
Shocking.
Is anyone surprised?
Yeah, but at the same time too, you have to factor in that, a lot of those games are bleeding clock too, because they were up by so much. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of the bad thing about this schedule too, is that, Michigan's not necessarily going to be in a game where, they haven't played a game where they've needed everyone for all 4 quarters. So, and they might not have any, for maybe 3-4 out of a 12-game schedule. So, that kind of, it just gets away from you, because you have to bleed clock and stuff. And you obviously can't pass when you're trying to, you can, but you have to be pretty efficient passing team to bleed clock passing. But there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. And that's kind of the good and bad with Michigan's schedule so far.
We were talking about JJ's numbers, and early in the year, like why he could not get into Heisman consideration. And we theorized with the offense and whatever. And, Brock and I were saying he's even on a slower pace, arguably, than the year before.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about breaking these passing records, and he's on pace for a good year. He might get into 3,000, which hasn't happened a ton at Michigan. But the Navarre record's looking difficult right now,
which is crazy because
he's probably the best QB in college football by some metrics.
Yeah, which that number is crazy because that's pedestrian compared to other programs and what they put up on a regular basis. So, but that's just what Michigan's always is and always will be, under Harbaugh, which is fine. Back-to-back Big Ten champions. You can't really complain.
You can, though.
Yeah, you can. But,
if anything, his best shot is to break the touchdowns record. He's got 10 right now, and he needs 26 to break the record. 16 in at least 7 more games, probably looking at 8, maybe 9, maybe even 10. So I think it's definitely attainable.
we're getting into the thick of that now, where some records are going to start to come into play, and number 1,000 is on the horizon.
Yeah.
If they win out, it's Maryland, right? The week before. Yeah. So that's a fun debate. Do you want them to lose one game so they get up number 1,000 against Ohio State, right?
Yeah.
No.
I'm not sure it's that important.
No.
Yeah, no, just win.
Yeah, absolutely. So last point, because Derek is 100% right on this. The weather difference we're going to see here.
Yeah.
Brock and I were on the field at what, 9:30, 10 a.m.? How early did we get down there when the band was practicing?
It was
early. It was already 90.
Yeah,
It was 95 degrees in Nebraska. Either was it October or the day before October started. I'm here in Michigan. It was 80 something today, and it's going to drop quick this week. And they're talking about 40s.
Yeah.
A night game in Minnesota. That's the only, Brock, I'll give you the last word on this. The only thing I think that there might be a difference was we hypothesized that some of that rotation Saturday against Nebraska was about keeping guys fresh because of the heat.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if there's going to be less rotation now because of the colder weather, but game plan wise, I'm not sure we'll see a big change. JJ's comment was hilarious to me when I think it was Angelique asked him about throwing in the wind, if that was difficult or if that was a consideration in some of his, options or what he was doing on the field. He's like, I grew up in Chicago.
Yeah.
I think he said the Windy City specifically or whatever, but
yeah.
I don't think this team cares what the weather is personally. But Brock, do you think that's going to matter? Do you see any game plan differences around that?
Not really. I feel like we could maybe see a little bit less rotation just because I do think on some level they were making more of an effort to rotate guys just because of how hot it was. But we've seen Michigan win games in the snow. We've seen them win games in the heat. We've seen them win games inside and outside. I don't think it's going to matter. Minnesota's not really necessarily a good football team, and Michigan's one of the best in the country. So, all signs are pointing to a big Michigan win.
I agree. This is the first week. I think we've also seen too the betting line moving the other way. Right, Michigan did not cover in the first 3 games, and that was kind of the talk, was they weren't blowing out these teams by enough. The Rutgers line creeped. Actually, creeped isn't the right word. It swung pretty heavily to Rutgers' favor once that line was posted. And then Nebraska, everybody was kind of light on it again. And Brock, you talked about, you thought a monster cover was coming. You were right about that. And we've already seen in this one, it's gone Michigan's way about 3 or 4 points, back over 20 now. So I think everybody's kind of expecting the same type of win, which again, Josh, like you said, I think there's a lot of things maybe fans would like to see. It's hard to complain when they're sticking to the formula that's been working so well. Obviously, we'll have to see if it continues, if they can win at Happy Valley, if they can be 11-0 facing Ohio State, beat them again, Big Ten championship. And then we get into new territory. Are you going to win a playoff game? Right? That's going to be the narrative. So As we said, we're hitting the halfway point this weekend for the Michigan football regular season.
Crazy.
It is crazy.
Jeez.
It's so fast. And you spend 9 months hypothesizing and coming up with all this stuff, and then you blink and it's gone. So I always tell people, enjoy it, man. Whatever this year ends up being, hopefully for fans, it's the ultimate prize, right? But whatever it ends up being, value it, man. We don't get a lot of this, right? So
very true.
We will be continuing to cover the results of Nebraska, some takeaways from that, and then obviously turning our attention to the Gophers, the Fighting PJ Flex, the Boat Rowers, the home of Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins, Holland, Michigan's own Kirk Cousins. So make sure you continue to follow us here on YouTube, like, subscribe, get that notification bell so you know when we go live with Hail to the Podcast, with cut-ups, with the Wizard Toski and his film review. Should be having that tomorrow evening. Dennis Fithian's live every day at 1 p.m. with coverage. He has great guests that come on. And then, of course, like I tell you all the time, 60-80% of what we talked about here, we've already been talking about inside the den over at michigan.rivals.com. Can't say enough about our community. Would love for you to come be a part of it and join the conversation over there and help to contribute to the content drive. So much of what we do and the ideas we get and what we write about and the angles we provide comes from our subscribers. Like we work for you. We don't talk at you. That's always been our goal. And if you don't like my sales pitch, like I said, you can ask our subscribers. They are vocal and supportive, and we're just so lucky to have the community that we've built at Maize and Blue Review. So again, michigan.rivals.com/sign up if you're not a part of the community already. We'd love to have you. You can get access to our content, premium, and then of course Josh's intel, which again I'm biased because the man signs my paychecks, but I think he's the best in the business. Very consistent, and Josh, in all seriousness, we appreciate everything you do for us and for the site. So for Josh and for Brock, my car buddy, good to see you. Good to sign off for this episode. We'll see you next week.